The global trade context. In recent years, global trade dynamics have undergone dramatic changes. Tariffs, trade wars, and protectionist policies have reshaped how countries conduct business with each other. The United States, under the Trump administration, imposed a series of tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automotive goods that disrupted traditional trade flows between North American countries. These tariffs were intended to protect U.S. industries, but they inadvertently strained relationships with long-standing trade partners like Canada and Mexico. Both nations, highly dependent on cross-border trade with the U.S., faced billions of dollars in additional costs. By 2019, tariffs on certain goods had reached 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum, significantly impacting manufacturers. The ripple effect was substantial. Canadian steel exports to the U.S., previously worth over $2.5 billion annually, saw sharp declines. Similarly, Mexico faced increased costs on auto parts and agricultural products. This environment created a sense of urgency for Canada and Mexico to explore alternative trade channels to protect their economies. Why Canada and Mexico need a new deal? Canada and Mexico share more than just a border with the United States. They share economic interdependence. For decades, the U.S. has been the largest export market for both countries, accounting for nearly 75% of Canada's exports and over 80% of Mexico's exports. However, the imposition of tariffs threatened this structure, forcing both nations to diversify their trade strategies. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, replaced NAFTA in 2020, but while it modernized certain aspects of trade, it didn't eliminate the potential for future tariffs. Canada and Mexico realized that to truly secure their economies, they needed bilateral mechanisms independent of Washington's policy swings. Here's the key point. Both countries aim to reduce reliance on the US dollar trade route and find ways to bypass American tariffs legally. This new deal is the culmination of those efforts. The role of US tariffs and Trump's policy legacy. Donald Trump's presidency left a profound impact on North American trade. His America First agenda emphasized domestic manufacturing and introduced aggressive tariffs against foreign goods, including those from close allies. These measures, Trump argued, were necessary to protect U.S. jobs and industries from what he perceived as unfair competition. Here is what Trump says relevant to the argument. We are not going to let countries take advantage of the United States anymore. If that means tariffs, then tariffs it is, Trump stated during a 2018 rally in Pennsylvania. This quote reflects the philosophy that underpinned U.S. trade policy at the time, a belief that protectionism was key to American prosperity. While the Biden administration has sought to stabilize trade relations, many tariffs remain in place or are difficult to remove politically.
We want to engage further with Mexico, a strategic partner. Very important as well in the context of the USMCA, Canada and Mexico share a lot. We want to diversify market. We want to look at exports. We want to look at how we can do more together.
So the ministers are expected to be in Mexico City for the next 2 days. They'll be taking part in meetings. Sources are telling CBC News that this could be laying the groundwork for a meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and the Mexican president. Carney, of course, has met with President Sheinbaum before at the G7, spoken to her many times as well. So again, this is all about trying to lay more groundwork between these two trading partners who are trying to deal with a very unpredictable senior partner, if you will, in the United States, as they're both trying to navigate really the unpredictability of Donald Trump and his trade policies.
Cross-border manufacturing partnerships. A major innovation in the deal is the establishment of joint production zones in strategic regions. For example, Canadian companies producing steel components will partner with Mexican manufacturers assembling final goods. This co-production approach allows products to originate from Canada and Mexico jointly, reducing dependency on US-specific certification requirements. $2 billion initial trade commitment. Both governments announced that the deal will generate $2 billion worth of trade in its first phase, focusing on energy exports, auto parts, and agricultural commodities. According to Canadian Trade Minister François-Philippe Champagne, this is about securing supply chains and ensuring competitiveness in a volatile global market. How it circumvents US tariffs. The central question remains, how does this agreement bypass US tariffs legally? The answer lies in re-export strategies and supply chain restructuring. Here's how. Canadian and Mexican companies as intermediaries. By creating joint venture entities in both countries, Canadian goods can be finished or partially processed in Mexico and then shipped to Latin American or European markets without touching US soil. Similarly, Mexican goods can undergo final assembly in Canada and move to Asian markets through Canadian ports. Regional Value Content, RVC, adjustments. Unlike USMCA, which requires strict RVC thresholds to qualify for tariff-free movement into the US, CMTOA has no such limitations because the US is not a party. This gives both nations the flexibility to source materials globally without worrying about US customs enforcement. Digital customs clearance. The deal introduces a blockchain-based customs platform for transparent tracking of goods. This innovation not only reduces fraud but also eliminates delays that previously cost businesses millions of dollars annually. Financial impact. Worth $2 billion in initial trade. According to projections from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the first year of CMTOA is expected to boost bilateral trade by $2 billion, with the following breakdown. $800 million in energy exports, natural gas and crude oil from Canada to Mexico. $650 million in auto parts and machinery. $400 million in agricultural goods, Canadian wheat, Mexican avocados, and processed foods. $150 million in tech services and digital solutions. Industry leaders believe these figures could double within 3 years. The Mexican Economy Secretariat stated, "We expect trade with Canada to grow by at least 40% year-over-year under this agreement." Strategic advantages for both nations. For Canada, diversifies trade away from US dependency. Expands access to Mexican consumer markets worth $1.3 trillion GDP. Strengthens energy exports amid global demand fluctuations. For Mexico, gains access to Canadian technology and high-quality manufacturing components. Enhances food and agricultural exports to Canada's high-value markets. Reduces reliance on US imports amid political uncertainty. Here is what Trump says relevant to the argument. If Canada and Mexico think they can cut us out, they're wrong. "We will put tariffs on everything, believe me," Trump said during a recent rally commenting on North American trade issues. This reflects ongoing US political rhetoric that could escalate if the agreement undermines American economic influence. Economic analysis. Impact on the Canadian economy. Canada's economy stands to gain significantly from this new trade alignment with Mexico. Historically, Canada has relied on the United States for more than 75% of its exports, which left it vulnerable to US political decisions. The CMTOA changes that dynamic by offering an alternative export route worth billions of dollars. Key Canadian sectors expected to benefit include energy industry. Canada is one of the largest exporters of crude oil and natural gas in the world. Under CMTOA, Mexico has committed to increasing imports of Canadian energy by 35% over the next 3 years, translating into an additional $1.2 billion annually for Canadian producers. Manufacturing and auto parts. Canadian manufacturers will now have priority access to Mexico's rapidly expanding automotive sector, which produces more than 3 million vehicles annually. This agreement ensures that Canadian-made components flow into Mexico's assembly lines without tariff barriers. Agriculture. Canada will export wheat, barley, and other grains to Mexico under a zero-tariff regime, opening opportunities for farmers who previously faced US trade disruptions. Canadian Trade Minister François-Philippe Champagne stated, "This deal is a strategic move for Canada. It strengthens our economy, reduces dependency, and creates thousands of high-quality jobs." Estimates suggest CMTOA could create up to 45,000 new jobs in Canada by 2027, particularly in manufacturing and logistics. Impact on the Mexican economy. Mexico, the second-largest economy in Latin America, is equally poised to benefit. The deal allows Mexico to reduce its reliance on US markets, which currently absorb over 80% of Mexican exports. Key benefits for Mexico. Automotive sector expansion. Mexico's auto industry employs over 1 million workers and contributes 3.5% to its GDP. By partnering with Canadian suppliers, Mexico can reduce production costs by up to 15%, making its exports more competitive in Europe and Asia. Agriculture and food products. Mexican farmers gain broader access to Canada's premium food markets. Products like avocados, tomatoes, and processed foods will enjoy duty-free status, potentially increasing Mexican agricultural exports by $400 million annually. Technology transfer and innovation. Canadian firms will provide technological expertise to Mexico's growing tech sector. Joint ventures in software and AI are projected to generate $150 million in new business opportunities in the first 2 years, according to Mexico's Economy Secretary Raquel Buenrostro. This deal gives us breathing space. It allows Mexico to position itself as a global trade hub, not just a US supplier. Risks and criticism. While CMTOA has been widely praised, it's not without criticism. Potential US retaliation. The biggest concern is that Washington may respond with punitive tariffs or sanctions on Canadian and Mexican goods that indirectly affect US trade interests. If Trump or another protectionist leader returns to the White House, the rhetoric could turn into policy. Here is what Trump says relevant to this argument. We will not let countries undermine America's trade dominance. If they try, we will hit them harder than ever before. Supply chain complexity. Creating cross-border production zones sounds efficient on paper, but in practice, it involves complex logistics. Businesses will need to invest in blockchain tracking systems and coordinate compliance across 2 different regulatory frameworks. Global economic volatility. Energy prices, inflation, and geopolitical instability could reduce the projected $2 billion benefit. For example, if oil prices fall below $60 per barrel, Canada's energy exports to Mexico will generate less revenue than expected. Industry and market reactions. Canadian and Mexican business associations have largely welcomed the deal. The Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association called CMTOA a game changer, noting that 70% of its members expect increased sales to Mexico within the first year. On the Mexican side, the Confederation of Industrial Chambers, CONCAMIN, emphasized that the agreement positions Mexico as a gateway to new markets, particularly Asia and Europe, via Canadian logistics infrastructure. However, some US-based companies operating in North America expressed concern that the agreement could redirect supply chains away from the US, potentially reducing American exports by $500 million annually. US reaction and Trump's position. Heading 12. Initial US government response. The announcement of the Canada-Mexico Trade Optimization Agreement, CMTOA, immediately drew attention from Washington. While the Biden administration has maintained a measured stance, there is growing concern that this deal could erode US trade leverage in North America. A spokesperson from the US Trade Representative's office stated, "We are evaluating the implications of the Canada-Mexico Agreement. Our focus remains on strengthening regional supply chains under the USMCA framework." This diplomatic response contrasts sharply with the more aggressive rhetoric from former President Donald Trump and his allies, who view the deal as a direct challenge to US economic dominance. Trump's reaction: America first strikes back. Donald Trump wasted no time in criticizing the CMTOA during a campaign rally in Texas. Here is what Trump says relevant to the argument. Canada and Mexico think they can play games with the United States? Wrong. We built their economies, and now they want to cut us out. Not gonna happen. If they try, we will put tariffs on everything: cars, steel, you name it. Trump's statement underscores a potential return to aggressive trade policies if he regains power in 2025 or beyond. He also warned that American companies moving supply chains to Canada or Mexico under CMTOA would face massive penalties. This rhetoric resonates with a significant portion of the US manufacturing base, particularly in the Midwest, where voters remain sensitive to job losses linked to trade deals. Political divide in Washington. Not all US politicians share Trump's hardline approach. Some lawmakers, especially those from border states, acknowledge that Canada and Mexico have a right to pursue independent trade policies. Senator Marco Rubio commented, "We need to make sure America stays competitive, but we can't bully allies into submission. The better strategy is to strengthen USMCA and ensure it remains attractive." However, a faction within Congress is pushing for investigations into whether CMTOA undermines US national security interests, particularly in areas like energy and technology cooperation. Possible retaliation scenarios. Trade experts are debating how the US might respond if CMTOA significantly shifts supply chains away from the American market. Here are 3 possible scenarios. Targeted tariffs. The US could impose additional tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods entering the US to discourage companies from exploiting CMTOA advantages.